One of Pioneer's much loved one-drops, a well-respected and very much appreciated wrestling tag team, and a not so well-respected male porn star. What do they all have in common? Well, they all feature Hardy Boys. Now, for the sake of being able to keep creating content on YouTube, I'll forget the porn star reference for the rest of this video, and instead we'll focus on this green-white Pioneer Hardened Scales Humans list. My name is Dan, this is MTG Tavern, and today we're playing green-white, the Hardy Boys.
Hello there, and welcome.
Now, very briefly before we do the actual deck tech, I just want to talk about the reasoning for how I've constructed this deck, and I wanted to make a budget deck, and whilst the deck is budget on MTGO at around about 78 tickets, it's currently around about $180 in paper. So the idea of this original deck was to be very budget friendly, and therefore we are missing some cards that you would probably at least consider which are a bit more expensive, like Collected Company or Rest in Peace Out of the Sideboard. And there's some weird choices which we'll explain as the video goes along. But just remember, the deck was originally meant to be budget, and because of a couple of cards, it's not quite so budget friendly as I hoped. Now on to the deck tech. Hardened Scales is a card which is very powerful in not just this format, but also Modern. The problem is, in Pioneer and Modern, there are other cards that are very expensive. Stuff like a Walking Ballista, a Hangerback Walker are quite expensive cards, and if you're just looking to dip your toes into the format but want a very powerful but not so expensive deck, then this green-white humans list is definitely for you, and it's a list you could upgrade over time to maybe bring in those Hangerback Walkers, those Walking Ballistas down the line. So let's begin as we always do with our land base. We're going to start with 4 Temple Gardens, 4 Sunpetal Groves, 4 Fortified Villages, and 4 Canopy Vistas. The beautiful thing about a deck like this is that you don't need too many utility lands. We're kind of a green-white aggro deck that has a little bit of utility in the creature base, but in reality we just need to hit our lands, hit our colours, ideally untapped, and play our things. We don't need to be messing around too much. We've also got 3 forests and 3 plains. Now, the only land I really want to talk about here is the Temple Garden, and at $35 for a playset, you could definitely cut Temple Gardens if you were trying to get the cost of this deck below the $100 mark. So, the boring old mana base out the way, let's move on to some other stuff. First of all, we've got 4 Hardened Scales. Now, these are $27 in paper for a playset, which is still actually reasonably cheap considering it's going to be one of the more powerful cards and a key piece in a good strategy going forward in this format. So, Hardened Scales is a 1 green mana enchantment, and it reads, if 1 or more +1/+1 counters be placed on a creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counter are placed on it instead. So we're going to start our human build here in the 1-drops with an Experiment 1. It costs 1 green mana, it's a 1/1, and then you can remove 2 +1/+1 counters from it to regenerate Experiment 1. So if you can get this guy above 3 power using counters, then you're going to be able to keep him alive for a board wipe. He also has Evolve. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has a greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So let's just say we play a Thraben Inspector, which is our next creature, that has 2 toughness. So when that enters the battlefield, the Experiment 1 will have less toughness than the Thraben Inspector, and therefore it will get a +1/+1 counter because of the Evolve. However, with Hardened Scales, it says whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on a creature, instead we put 2 +1/+1 counters on the creature. Therefore, with Hardened Scales out, it's not hard for this creature to become a 3/3, potentially even a 5/5 throughout the course of the game for just 1 green mana. The next card, as we mentioned before, is a Thraben Inspector, and it brings along a clue token. Now, this doesn't actually put counters on our creatures. I just want to have a good 1-drop that maybe can replace itself. We are a little bit susceptible to a board wipe, so a Thraben Inspector bringing along a clue token. We don't have to crack it unless we want to until later on into the game, but it's just a good human in the early part of the game. Next up, we have Servant of the Scale, another 1 green mana human, and enters the battlefield as a 0/0 with a +1/+1 counter on it. And then when Servant of the Scale dies, it puts X +1/+1 counters on target creature we control, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Servant of the Scale. So first of all, it's worth noting you have Hardened Scales out, and then you cast a Servant of the Scale, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, but then it gets an additional +1/+1 counter because of Hardened Scales. Then, when it dies, it will put X, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it, onto another creature, but also, with Hardened Scales out, that's +1/+1 counters being put onto another creature. So that means it will get X +1. Now before we move into the 2-drops, there is actually a second video I uploaded this week and you probably haven't seen it yet. It is mono red dragons in Pioneer, and believe me, you're going to want to see this one. However, this video is for patrons and Twitch subscribers only, those who go out their way to really support the channel. To get access to this video and to support the channel for just $1 per month, I'm not asking you for a huge amount of money, then go ahead and click on the Patreon link down below. Just pledge $1 and then you'll have access to not just the Mono Red Dragons video, but every Patreon exclusive video up until this point. But for now, let's get back to Green White Hardened Scales, the Hardy Boys. We begin our 2-drops with a Thalia's Lieutenant. Puts a +1/+1 counter on all of our human creatures, which is most of our creatures. However, with Hardened Scales out, it puts 2 counters on all of our other human creatures. Thalia's Lieutenant also gets a little bit bigger whenever another human enters the battlefield and gets a +1/+1 counter. Next up, we have a Charming Prince, a 2-mana 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, we choose to either scry 2, which fixes our withdrawals, gain 3 life if we get maybe a mono-red deck, that could be very useful, or we can exile another target creature we own and return it to the battlefield under our control at the beginning of the next end step. So we could quite easily blink a Thraben Inspector and get another clue token. But more often than not, we'd probably like to blink the Thalia's Lieutenant. Now that will remove all of the counters from Thalia's Lieutenant, but then on end step, the Lieutenant will come back down, put another 2 +1/+1 counters on our entire team. Our final 2-drop is a 3-of Duskwatch Recruiter. Now, if this guy can flip over, then it makes our humans cost a little bit less, which is actually quite relevant. Remember, with Thraben Inspector, we might want to crack those clue tokens, but also we'd like to play human on the same turn as well. Even if the Duskwatch Recruiter doesn't flip, paying 3 mana to go and tutor a few cards deep to maybe find another human and keep the pressure on, maybe we're stumbling because we're drawing too many lands, maybe our opponent's got a lot of removal, it's still a good utility creature to catch back up. Our final 3 creatures are all 1-ofs. First of all, a 1-of Abzan Falconer gives all of our creatures with a +1/+1 counter on them flying, so if we cast this later on in the game, say our opponent's got a few blockers out, we can fly over, get in for 10+ points of damage and hopefully end the game. We have a 1-of Heron's Grace Champion, just a 1-off because at 4 mana it is quite expensive, but it's a nice combat trick. Say we're against a fellow aggro deck and we want to have combat tricks, flash it in, gives our creatures +1/+1 and lifelink until end of turn, can be used as a way to just end the game out of nowhere. And as a 3/3 by itself, it's not bad to just play on our opponent's end step, even if we don't get the combat trick. Our final creature is a Verdurous Gearhulk as a 1-of, and this is only a 1-of not only because of the mana cost, we want to be as low to the ground as possible, but also the fact it's not a human, so we don't want to see it in multiples. We really want to see it once later on into the game, so we can then, much like a Thalia's Lieutenant, spread the counters out across the team, double them up with the Hardened Scales, and then attack our opponent for a lot of damage. Moving on from the creature base, we have 3 Nissa Voice of Zendikars. All we're really looking at with Nissa is really the -2, comes down, 3 mana, puts a +1/+1 counter on our entire team, then we start ticking up afterwards, get plant tokens, and maybe minus a second time a couple of turns later. We have a 4-of Dromoka's Command, and this is pretty much our only way of removal in this deck. Usually we're going to choose to put a +1/+1 counter on one of our creatures and have a creature fight a creature of our opponent. So it will put 2 +1/+1 counters on with a Hardened Scales out, and then make 2 creatures fight. It also has good utility outside of that. Maybe getting rid of an enchantment from our opponent's side of the board is going to be useful. Maybe we can prevent the damage from, say, an Anger of the Gods, so it doesn't board wipe our side of the board later in the game. Finally, we've got a couple of 1-of fun-ofs. First of all, we've got an Unbreakable Formation, 2 and a white, gives our creatures indestructible until end of turn, and if we cast it during our first main phase, they get a +1/+1 counter. That seems pretty good to me, and they gain Vigilance. So not only is it an anti-board wipe spell later in the game, but it could also just grow our team to get in for those last points of damage. And then finally, 1-of Inspiring Call gives our creatures indestructible until end of turn if they have a +1/+1 counter on them, and then we get to draw a card for each creature that has a +1/+1 counter on it. That is backbreaking. If we manage to dodge a board wipe plus, say, draw 2 or 3 cards, it's going to be very hard for any control deck to come back from that. Moving into the sideboard, we have 3 Declaration Stones if our opponent's got a lot of creatures out and we want to get them out of the way. 2 Evolutionary Leaps, really good against decks that have got heavy amounts of removal. We instead sacrifice one of our creatures, and then we get a different creature at random from the top of our library. 4 Hallowed Moonlights, this is our version of Graveyard Hate, really good against the Rally the Ancestors and the Arclight Phoenix decks, also really good against Aetherworks Marvel. It's worth noting that Rest in Peace is a very, very expensive card right now, and so is Grafdigger's Cage, and Hallowed Moonlight kind of covers both bases whilst also drawing us a card, so Hallowed Moonlight is not a bad replacement. A one-off collective effort if our opponent's playing maybe a big, cheap creature or something that can flip like a Thing in the Ice. Thing in the Ice is quite hard for us to beat anyway, but if we can destroy the creature, maybe that can get us back in the game. We can also put a +1/+1 counter on our entire team and take out an enchantment. An Eerie Interlude is there for pure value. Not only does it get around a board wipe or just any targeted removal, but most of our creatures have ETB effects. If we blink a Charming Prince, a Thalia's Lieutenant, a Thraben Inspector, they all accrue value when they come back down. We have an extra Inspiring Call, and you'll notice a theme here with my build. I'm looking to avoid board wipes and any kind of damage being done to my creatures whilst accruing value. And then finally, a 2-off Conclave Tribunal, really there for planeswalkers more than anything else, but we're probably happy taking a turn off to tap our creatures to pay for this and get rid of a permanent we just don't want to see. And that is green-white Hardy Boys, and I did say that I would talk more about making this deck more budget friendly. The first thing I would suggest is cutting the Temple Gardens. They are 36 tickets for a playset, and whilst having consistent mana is ideal, you don't have to have them in here. Those could be 4 basics, 4 utility lands like a Field of Ruin. It wouldn't hurt the deck too much, although you would occasionally find those situations where you really want the green and white mana on turn 1 and you've got a whole bunch of basics. The next thing you can cut is a Nissa Voice of Zendikar. We have it as a 3-of in this deck, and at 32 tickets for just 3 cards, that is approximately 10.5 tickets per card, you don't need to have Nissa Voice of Zendikar. You could quite easily put in a Rishkar for this, or more Verdurous Gearhulks. Now, removing those 2 cards does get us down to around about $115 in paper, and if you're absolutely adamant you want to get this below $100, then you have the option of maybe removing some Dromoka's commands or some Declarations and Stones out of the sideboard. Some very budget alternatives I could offer for the Dromoka's command is some Oath of Ajani's or some Song of Freyles. It does put the counters on our team, which is kind of what we're in the business of doing with this particular deck, but also with the Song of Freyles, it can also help you ramp out your hand quite nicely, so you might even be able to cut the Temple Gardens completely from your deck and just add a couple of basics. And as we said, even if you do want to start out with the real budget version for today, less than $100, upgrading for just $30 for 3 Nissas is not a big expense going forward if you enjoy the deck. Anyway, let's go and play some games. Now, before we get to the gameplay right here, a big thank you to the people scrolling on screen right now. They would be donators on Patreon or Twitch subscribers who help provide the content here on this channel. If you would like to help support the channel and get access to exclusive video content like this, then consider supporting the channel via Patreon or becoming a Twitch subscriber. The links are in the description down below. Our opening hand has quite the damn nice curve, and maybe a few too many lands. We don't have the hardened scales, but I don't think I could put back a nice curve like this. I do love me some curves. We draw in a lovely Nissa Voice of Zendikar. We slap down the Thraben Inspector. We get ourselves a lovely clue token. Our opponent is starting with a Thought Erasure. They will erase our thoughts, and you would assume that is Thalia's Lieutenant going bye-bye. Bye-bye to Thalia's Lieutenant, which means no 2-drop, unless you top deck like an absolute beast. The second Thalia's Lieutenant, and opponent, that must feel bad. Your Thought Erasure wasn't completely useless. They still do take the Thalia's Lieutenant from us, but, you know, we're kind of slipping and sliding. They make sure we know that it was a glitch in the Matrix, and it is a bit frustrating when that happens. I must admit, when you Thoughtseize or Inquisition or something like that in Modern, and they just draw the card you take, it's like, ugh, really? Really now? So opponent opts a couple of times, they put a Steam Vents down, means we get to resolve our Nissa Voice of Zendikar, tick down for 2 and get in for 5 points of damage, and, I mean, it hasn't been the best opening hand ever. We didn't have the hardened scales or anything like that, but our opponent is only on 11, and sure they have removal things in their deck, but they need to have a board wipe, I think, or something like that pretty soon, because our guys are getting pretty swole. Cryptic Serpent, Pioneer All-Star Cryptic Serpent is going to slow our beefy boys down. For now, we top deck a Thalia's Lieutenant, which is a rather nice top deck. We grow our team again. We have a second Nissa next turn as well, so we get to put 2 counters on our entire team next turn, and I don't know, man. If we top deck another human with 2 Thalia's Lieutenants out, then things are not looking good on their side of the board. All of a sudden, our rather slim-looking guys become swole guys. Opponent goes for a Tetramander. They grow it straight away, or to have the Adapt 4 straight away, but with Thraben Inspector on top, that puts a counter on our Thraben Inspectors. With 2 Nissa Voice Zendikars, that's going to put 2 counters on our entire team. We don't have a Hardened Scales out. Look at the size of our boys. Our big boys are about to get very, very, very big, and their Cryptic Serpent and Tetramander are not going to be really doing much. And I just swing with everything. I don't give a fuck if you want to, like, chump block or, like, just kill our plant token and our smaller human. You're still going to take a lot of damage. Probably, like, blocks like a bitch. And then they're down to 3 life. They need a board wipe right now. It has to be a board wipe literally right now. Like, there's no point just chucking out another creature. That's not going to do anything. And, man, our humans are fucking the face of our opponent. They're absolutely wiping their ass. Wait, that's... I'm not really good at, like, smack talk. Is wiping someone's ass? Isn't that being nice to them? Anyway, our opponent goes for a Bedlam Reveler, which is not bad. You know, they discard 2 cards, probably 2 useless cards in their hand. They draw 3. Bedlam Reveler comes down, but Bedlam Reveler's not going to do anything. We still have lethal next turn, unless they have a removal spell. An Opt, not going to do much. You need a Fatal Push, that means now, and they don't have it, and we take down game 1. Now, after game 1, I'm a little bit worried about board wipes or removal, so I bring in a couple of Evolutionary Leaps so we can sacrifice the creature in response and then generate some value. The Inspiring Call to protect against the board wipe, also maybe draw us a whole bunch of cards. A Collective Effort to take out the Tetramander on their side, or the Serpent, and then a Conclave Tribunal again. I didn't want to over-sideboard here, so we could bring in more protection spells, like an Eerie Interlude. But I just decided to take out a Dromoka's Command or 2, Nissa, and then I believe we take out the Abzan Falconer as well. The Abzan Falconer gives flying, but they don't have that many creatures, so I guess it might be important to fly over. But whatever, look at this opening hand. We've got Hardened Scales on 1, followed by an Experiment 1, plus maybe a Servant of the Scale on 2 to grow the Experiment 1, meaning we can get 5 power on the board on turn 2, and just grow our team potentially from there. This is great, and the Hardy Boys are going to come home to get the tag team titles. We draw another Frabian Inspector, which is pretty good. I would prefer a land at this point, but I'm more than happy drawing loads of 1-drops. And a Young Pyromancer is actually pretty damn annoying. Can I have my Abzan Falconer back, please? I didn't contemplate a Young Pyromancer on their side of the board, and that's going to be quite hard to swing through if we... I mean, I guess our opponent can just maybe not have too much removal and we're able to overpower all of their tokens if we can keep being aggressive early. I guess that's the plan. But for now, I put down the Frabian Inspector on 1 instead of the Servant of the Scale. I guess, like, getting the clue token might be important. It's going to give us options later on. I guess as a 1-2, it's, like, not as big as the Servant of the Scale might be. I have no idea, actually, what I'm doing. I don't know why I play Frabian Inspector on 1. I probably should have played Servant of the Scale. Because then if our opponent uses Servant of the Scale, like some removal on Servant of the Scale, it puts the counters onto Experiment 1. Anyway, we top deck an Inspiring Call, so now we have protection from a board wipe. And we draw a whole bunch of cards later on. I swing in with both creatures. I'm more than happy trading my Thrabian Inspector for their Young Pyromancer. If my opponent makes a couple of tokens to go ahead and, like, kill the Thrabian Inspector, so be it. Put down a Servant of the Scale, which is going to come down with 2 counters on it. Should it resolve? It does have to resolve first. Those are the rules. It does come down as a 2-2, a Desmond 2-2. Followed by another Thrabian Inspector, and this time our opponent does go for a K command to make us discard a card and deal 2 damage to the actual Thrabian Inspector. And to be honest, not overly bothered about that. We get rid of the Duskwatch Recruiter, and honestly, it is a 2-for-1 for them, but it's not the worst. Like, they used one of their 2-for-1s there to get rid of a Thrabian Inspector, which has already generated us a clue token. Anyway, we top deck a Dromoka's Command. We're just going to attack for now. We're not going to cast anything. We're going to hold up Dromoka's Command. We're a little bit worried about a counter spell. We were going to go ahead and Dromoka's Command this turn, but unfortunately, our opponent concedes, and we overwhelm them on board. The Hardy Boys showing Grixis control while we are super swole. And we wipe their ass. After the gloriousness of Game 2, we visit the dirty end of our human posse. These guys are so cheap, if they had a job, they would definitely be prostitutes. However, on the plus side, we have an opening, Hardened Scales, and 2 Experiment 1s, which we can hopefully grow with a Thrabian Inspector and overpower our opponent in the mid-game. Unfortunately, a Thalia's Lieutenant and a Thrabian Inspector of their own, and it looks like being on the play and being another kind of low-to-the-ground aggro deck means they might be able to overpower us in this early game, and we need things to go a little bit good. Opponent plays a Mardu Woe Reaper and a Declaration in Stone, and a Finger of Fudge. That is pretty nasty. That is pretty bad. Our opponent is left with a total of 6 power on board, and we're left with a Charming fucking Prince, which is about as charming as a big pile of dog crap at this point. In fact, that Declaration in Stone was so bad that our opponent gets to crack a Clue and just play a Thraben Inspector on their turn 4, and yet we're still miles behind on board and we're forced to really trade with Mardu Woe Reaper here, which does not feel great, but we can't really afford to take 7, half our life total, and not take something on their side of the board. We find another land off the top, which isn't too bad. It means we might be able to get to Nissa Voice of Zendikar next turn. Maybe we can rebuild, and going into the late game, we've still got our Clue tokens. Our opponent is still in such a good position on board, though. They get to crack a Clue token, play a second Thales Lieutenant. I don't know if we can ever come back from this. We're going to have to chum block a lot, and I don't know, man. It's not looking great. Our opponent luckily just gets in for 5, so we're not forced to block here. We draw a Temple Garden, which would be lovely, apart from the fact we need fucking creatures. We Nissa, we minus to grow our team pretty big. A Benelish Marshal, and I think, yeah, that's probably going to do it. We're going to have to chump block, and then we just die next turn. Well, the deck in Stone was decking bloody backbreaking there. I decided to bring in some amount of removal. Now, I do take out one Conclave Tribunal at the end of this, I believe. We take out the Charming Princess, which, to be honest, I don't know if this was a good piece of deck building by me to leave the Charming Princess in. I think there could have been something better. I think they offer a lot of flexibility, but we are essentially an aggro deck. We bring in a whole bunch of removal, including Collective Efforts. We take out a Jamoka's Command, all of the Charming Princes, and just one land. Our opening hand is a bit clunky, so we mulligan down to a decent hand here. It does have the Servant of the Scale on 1, a Thales Lieutenant on 2, and an Abzan Falconer on 3, so maybe we can fly over and we can, I don't know, maybe win the game that way. It's not the best opening hand we could have ever had. We're not going to have massive creatures. If we're lucky, we'll draw Hardened Scales off the top. We don't, we draw another bloody land, which is not really what we're looking for, but we do get to get in for 2 on the play, I guess. And who knows, maybe if we get lucky with our draws here, with the Falconer, we might be able to just take this one. We really want to avoid a Declaration Stone, though, as well. A Soldier of the Pantheon from our opponent, which is not going to be overly useful against us. We don't play, I don't think, any multicolour creatures. We get Fortune and top deck a Nissa Voice of Zendikar, so now, with the Abzan Falconer, not only are our humans evolved to have wings and fly into our opponent's face, but now they're going to have wings and they're going to get bigger. They're going to have big wings. They're going to have the wings of an eagle. A Benelish Marshal from our opponent is going to grow their entire team, so maybe the race is our own. Nice to find a side of the scale off the top. Really, really good that we can just play that down now, grow our team, get in and present lethal next turn, which need our opponent to not kill us here, please. I decided to leave one creature back because it's not going to affect the clock. I just want to make sure we have a blocker back, just in case our opponent, plays a couple of Thales Lieutenants out here. We can at least block. And since that 3 points of damage won't make any difference to the clock unless our opponent has removal, then I think it's probably fine. Unfortunately, our opponent has the deck in Stone for the second game in a row, which is a little bit frustrating. We haven't found any of our removal, but our opponent's found a good Declaration Stone at the right times in both games. They get it for 5 points of damage. They attack Nissa. I do decide to just chum block with the Servant of the Scale to get one of my creatures a little bit bigger. I don't know if this was the right idea or not, but now that we don't have flying, life's looking pretty bad. We crack a Clue token, we find a Duskwatch Recruiter. We just go ahead and attack our opponent. We want them to chum block or something like that. We just get in with the Thales Lieutenants. I think it's worth trading off the Servant of the Scale at this point. Unfortunately, our opponent has Brave the Elements. We have 2 green creatures. We are dead. That was kind of embarrassing. Well, the last round was a bit embarrassing, and though our opponent did have the Declaration Stones to bend us over a barrel at the right times, I think we probably were never going to win that one. They certainly got their powerful stuff down a lot earlier than us. Unfortunately, this round, we are going to keep a hand that is not bad. It has a Hardened Scales in it, and some good creatures to play afterwards, but unfortunately, the green source of mana is going to come out tapped on turn 1, so we have to go for a turn 2 Scales, which does not feel great. But luckily for us, our opponent's playing a slightly slower deck, or a bit more of a mid-rangey kind of deck, or at least a deck that kind of tries to go off a bit more in the mid-game with, is it Drakes? Now we do draw Nissa Voice of Zendikar and Jamoka's Command off the top, so we're getting a bit fortunate here, actually, that with our draws, should we say. We have Hardened Scales, and now we're going to put a lot of counters on our creatures. On the end step, we go Heron's Grace Champion. Now, the reason we go for this over Jamoka's Command is our opponent's tapped out, and we can Heron's Grace Champion to get an extra creature on the board. Doesn't mean we miss out on like +1/+1 for our team next turn, but we get +3/+3 with a Heron's Grace Champion, I guess. With Jamoka's Command, our opponent's thing in the ice, they have a second thing in the ice, and then a Charter Course. However, because they are tapped out and we have the Unbreakable formation and the Nissa in our hand, The game is now over because our opponent only has a 0/4 blocker, they're on 9 life, the Unbreakable formation as a minimum will give our creatures a +1/+1 counter and Indestructible and Vigilance, but it's just a +1/+1 counter they need. It will grow our team. There are no possible blocks for our opponents. That will prevent them from taking 9 points of damage. The game be over. Seems the boys are back in town. Boys are back in town. Boys are back in town. Now in sideboarding, since our opponent has very limited ways of winning the game, I decide to try and be interactive. If it doesn't work out, we'll try something different in game 3. I take out some of the top end, I take out some of the Nisses, I actually take out a couple of lands as well since I'm reducing my curve a little bit, and instead we're going to try and deal with their win conditions. So we bring in 4 Hallowed Moonlight, it's our version of Graveyard Hate. If our opponent tries to bring those Phoenixes back from the graveyard, they're going to get exiled. We also bring in some Declaration Stones and keep in some Dromoka's commands to deal with the Thing in the Ices. Worth noting as well, Dromoka's command is very, very good at dealing with a Anger of the Gods. If our opponent tries to board wipe, we can then use a Dromoka's command. Start of game 2, we're yet again keeping a Hardened Scales hand with no untapped green source on 1, and that's an issue we might have to address. Unfortunately, we top deck a Forest on turn 2, which is kind of the turn when I guess we could have used it, but it would have been a lot better on turn 1 to have the untapped green source then. Our opponent wild slashes the Servant of the Scale, and our opponent's hand is very, very slow. At the minute, we have a deck in stone for the first Thing in the Ice. We have pretty good cards in our hand, actually, and Experiment 1 is quite a nice top deck. That's going to be grown with the Thraben Inspector. All of a sudden, we have pressure on the board. We have something that can attack. Then opt from our opponent on end step, and they untap and cast a Crackling Drake. Now that is a little bit annoying, but not the end of the world. It is a 2/4, so it's going to be quite hard to swing through. Now, even though Declaration Stone will get that thing out of the way, I'd rather save my Declaration Stone for an actual Thing in the Ice, and at the end of the day, the Crackling Drake is just a 2/4 at the minute. Even if they grow up to, say, a 6/4 next turn, with us having the life lead plus the creature lead at the minute, it's going to be quite hard for our opponent to attack at the minute, and our creatures are just going to get bigger, especially with a Virtuous Gearhulk in our hand. Our opponent reveals 2 Fiery Tempers from a discarded Is It Charm, and they're considering for a very long time here, do they want to use the Madness ability? I think this is an awful position for them to be in because they want to use these cards, obviously, otherwise why would they be in your deck? But at the same time, if they tap out, I really like our position. Even if they use the Fiery Tempest to remove a creature here, that's perfectly fine by me. As it happens, our opponent goes face here, and that's even better for us. If we can keep our creatures on the battlefield, and we top deck a human next turn, and we can get the Crackling Drake out of the way, so a 1-mana human off the top is lethal, because it will grow the Thales Lieutenant by 2 thanks to the Hardened Scales, and that will be exactly 15. Our opponent actually gets in with the Crackling Drake, and now just any human off the top will win it for us. We top deck the Servant of the Scale, and I don't know what the hell our opponent was thinking there. I go for the Declaration Stone anyway, because why not? We put down the Servant of the Scale, and we win the game. Our ultra hard boys are ramming it down our opponent's throat. So overall, we went 2-1, and we kind of got a bit wrecked by mono-white aggro, but forgetting that, we actually kind of overwhelmed a couple of decent-looking decks. Certainly in the case of Is It Drakes, it looked like a more than decent deck. So what changes would I make with this particular deck? And I think the first thing I would definitely do is get rid of Charming Prince and get something that's not quite so utility focused as Charming Prince is, and just more raw power. Something like a Kythian, Hero of Akaros, which has the ability to flip over into a Planeswalker, is just a 2/1 on turn 1, has the potential to be indestructible as well, and I think in this deck it's not going to be hard to flip that over. And also with Duskwatch Recruiter, we could probably keep it in as maybe a 1, maybe a 2 of, but that could certainly be something that either puts counters on our creatures or is just a better, bigger, more cost-efficient human in the early to mid part of the game. And looking at the sideboard, much like Charming Prince and Duskwatch Recruiter, which are trying to accrue value over the course of the game, something that we're not going to be that good at, we're actually just an aggro deck, I think I'd also like to cut Eerie Interlude as well. Yes, it can kind of blink removal, but in reality it's only there to generate value over the course of the game, so we get to have that Charming Prince come back in, the Thraben Inspector, maybe a Thales Lieutenant comes down and grows our team that little bit bigger, but again, that's not really the game we're playing. Overall, this deck was actually surprisingly good, and as per usual, Hardened Scales is a big part of that. If you happen to have some of the more expensive pieces in this deck, say the Hardened Scales or maybe the Nisses, I would definitely recommend at least picking up a very budget version of this deck to just try out while you're getting your footsteps into the Pioneer format. Anyway, that is a very quick something different for today. We're probably going to have a second something different this week, or at least a second video of something like this. If you enjoyed the content here, feel free to go and leave a subscribe down below, give me a thumbs up. If you really enjoyed this content, there is actually another video which is for patrons and subscribers on Twitch only who are really helping out the channel. That, for just $1 a month, will get you access to the Mono Red Dragons in Pioneer list, and believe me, you will definitely want to see that one. It went insanely well. So for just $1 per month on Patreon, which is, let's be honest, not much, you can get access to that exclusive video and all previous videos from every single month before that. There will be links in the description down below. Anyway, my name was Dan, this was MTG Tavern, and I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Boom, what up guys, it's me back again. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Something Different. Remember to go over this way and look at some other videos over there. There's a subscribe button over there. I barely can say subscribe. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you next time. Much love, y'all.